Hello again, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens, everyone. I'm John, your host today, and today, something pretty straightforward. Reddit. When's a time when you thought to yourself, I'm dead? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. So I'm a firefighter in Florida. We have a house fire in the middle of the night, black smoke showing under the eaves of a one-story ordinary construction house. So my partner and I make entry. Smoke is black, but is layering near the ceiling, so we have a 5-foot feeling of visibility. We crawl to a back bedroom. Fire is creeping up the wall, so we start putting water on it. I'm standing behind him, helping him feed hose, until all of a sudden, we feel this insane vibration. I would describe it as the feeling of a firework going off directly beside me. I felt the ripple through my internal organs. All of a sudden, fire is rolling over our heads, and I grab my partner and start hauling ass to the door. The floor was extremely slippery, and being bogged down by our gear and desperately searching for the hose, as is now pitch black, I can't see anything, and more of these insane vibrations are happening. I'm thinking we're going to die. The building is going to come down on us. My family knows I love them. I just keep pulling along myself and the hose, and we laid on the ground until I'm at the front door. Other crew grab us and drag us to our feet. I look back and there's an explosion out of the garage and debris is flying up. Turns out these people had like 5 propane tanks sitting in the garage, and they just started exploding one after another. That, in 12 years of firefighting, has been what I think is my most dangerous fire. Slipped and fell in the bathroom in the middle of the night, landed on the sink, which broke in half. I, and most of the sink, hit the floor. Woke up in a growing pool of blood. The only pain was in my abdomen, which I guess had slammed into the edge of the sink. I was sure I'd cut my body in half, so I went to lift my dress and blood sprayed up the wall. I realized then my arm was cut down to the bone about 2/3 of the way round. I was pretty certain I was about to die, and I would have done so if I hadn't been home from uni for Christmas holidays and able to shout for my mum. My mum is no longer with us, but she undoubtedly saved my life. Skiing accident in 2017. It was late at night, and it was the final run of the season. Decided to limit test and go back down a double black bind, hardest slope available at the resort. The beginning was perfectly fine. However, at some point all of the snow had turned to ice and I lost all traction. This part of the slope also happened to be wide and steep hill, maybe 50 to 80 feet. I stumbled, recovered, stumbled again, and then in a last-ditch effort, just decided to bomb the hill to get out of the icy area. Big mistake. I made a rookie mistake, and my skis crossed. I fell forward and began rolling. At this speed, and on ice, there was no way to stop myself. I lost all control while barreling down this massive slope. My more experienced 2 friends noticed me heading off the mountainside and bombed it to catch up to me. I lost both skis, both poles, and my helmet. My friend caught up, and I slammed into them, knocking them both down, but also canceling out momentum enough for all of us not to fly off the side into the trees. I lived. Got out with 2 dislocated shoulders, bruised ribs, and a concussion. Friends were unharmed. Let's just say it was a very quiet and slow walk down the rest of the mountain. I was competing in an open water swimming race, specifically a race from Alcatraz Island to shore. You take a boat out near the island and swim back to shore. I was a collegiate swimmer and experienced open water marathon swimmer as well, and had competed in this race before. As far as open water swimming goes, it's not the hardest swim. It's not easy, but by any means, but most experienced open water swimmers should have no issues with it. Anyways, the day in question, the weather was particularly bad, and there was a lot of wind, causing larger than normal swells in the bay. I ended up getting knocked over by a swell and ended up about 3 or 4 feet underwater, which doesn't seem significant, but the water is very dark, and I was a bit disoriented. I could not tell which way was up or down. For a moment I thought that was it. I was going to drown. Then I remembered an episode of MacGyver, when MacGyver got caught in an avalanche, and he spit to determine which way was down, and he dug himself up that way. So, I blew some bubbles and followed them up to the surface. Ever since then, I've always competed in open water races, or swam in open water, with swim buoys. I always thought that they were nerdy, and someone as talented and experienced as myself didn't need one, but that changed my mind. I was on the Big Jetty in Ponce Inlet, Florida once, and I slipped and fell onto some of the big boulders that were encrusted with oyster shells, both alive and dead. It was like I was in slow motion during the free fall. I thought, well, this is it. I then found myself reorienting myself out of a gap between the boulders. I had landed knee and elbow first on said boulder, slid over the razor blade-esque oyster shells, and landed headfirst between that and another boulder. My legs and arms were numb from the dozens of cuts on my limbs. I was bleeding everywhere, but fortunately most weren't that deep. There was one on my knee that was very deep. Probably should have gotten stitches for it, but my family couldn't afford it at the time, so I had to wait months for it to heal. Usually with a repeating pattern of healing over and having a blood blister from under the skin, pop it, and repeat 2 weeks later. Scars still there. Was hiking with my wife and some other family members in southern Utah. We set up camp in the canyon, formed by a creek not very big, and took a late afternoon hike to an arch above a river the creek ran into about 3-ish miles downstream. The river was shallow enough to slowly wade across and hike up to the arch. Spent a couple hours up there, hiked back down, crossed the river, and noticed dark brown muddy water gushing out of the creek canyon. It was flash flooding pretty hard. We surveyed to see what we were up against, and we had to mentally prepare to stay the night on the small sandbar. While considering our options, we head the river behind us, rising in boulders and rocks shifting. We were trapped on this small sandbar suddenly. We had no idea it would keep rising on one or both sides of us or subside. We really carefully monitored the water levels and decided that the safest was actually locking arms and crossing the creek to try and climb out. We waded waist deep across slowly. It was hard and took all of our strength, but we got to the other side and climbed up Sandy Cliff about 20 feet up. Luckily, we had some climbing experience, thank goodness, and found an upper trail to start making our way up to camp about 3 miles upstream in the canyon. Side note, we figured the camp was fine because it was well above the flood level of the creek, so we weren't stressed about our family. It took another few hours, but we were able to climb, wade, and shimmy our way back to our camp in the dark, and came back to my very emotional parents, thinking we'd likely been killed in the flash. I still think about that trip often, and I've had a great reverence for the power of nature since then. It was only a few clouds in the sky from our vantage point, so the possibility of a flash flood didn't even cross our minds. It sure does now, every time I go hiking. At the end of the day, all this horror stuff that we read, I don't know if there's anything more fearsome than nature itself. Trailer came unhitched. It's my fault as the driver. I was fairly new at towing and didn't really know how to do the safety chains right. Then my father, who had installed the trailer, assured me the tongue was on correctly. I did not verify this. It was not. I was ferrying said fully loaded 6x12 trailer with my parents' brand new 1-ton dually, and we were cruising along at about 60 on the interstate when I feel a weird wobble. I look in the rearview mirror to see U-Haul streaking rapidly from one side of the mirror to the other. Tongue came off. Immediately, every video I had ever seen of decoupled trailers came to mind, most of them ending in total destruction of both truck and trailer, and that was the moment I thought, I'm dead. The high amount of drag on the truck told me that the trailer's e-brake had engaged and was doing its job. It also told me that at least that one safety cable was still attached. I did my best to keep the truck steady, but we were on a sweeping turn on an overpass with barely any shoulder to speak of. The truck's sway control was working overtime as I matched brakes with the trailer, trying to prevent it from riding up in the bed while slowing as fast as possible. With the trailer still swerving quite a bit, I managed to wrestle the truck to a stop, with both the truck and the trailer fully in the shoulder, and without having hit anything. The two regular safety chains hadn't been installed correctly by me. I crossed and looped them, but I didn't install the little rubber things to keep them from getting undone. Didn't know you were supposed to. The e-brake chain, however, I did randomly decide to put the rubber thing on for funsies, and that probably is what saved everything. That tongue was pretty scuffed up, as were the two dragging chains. The e-brake had gotten bent from its ride, and the electrical cable had gotten almost completely destroyed. The biggest problem was that we didn't have a trailer jack. I ended up having to shift the weight quite a bit back and have my mom, who was almost done with her panic attack, stand on the very back. Only then was I able to muscle the tongue back on the ball. Anyway, yeah, watch a YouTube video on how to attach a trailer, kids. I got lucky. A lot of people don't. I had a party at my house about 6 years ago. It was supposed to be for someone's birthday, and I guess I'm just that nice. About 30 people turned up. We drank, smoked, and played loud music. The neighbors called the police about 3 times. I decided that after the 3rd time, that was it, and asked people to leave. Mostly everyone did. However, 5 guys came back and kicked my door in, accused me of calling the police myself the 3rd time, and was using that as an excuse to ruin the party. They had taken some opioids or something, and couldn't be reasoned with. One held a knife to my throat, while 4 of them destroyed all my stuff. They didn't steal anything, just kicked in my TV, broke my guitars, and amps. I thought that was it, because they were off their heads and anything could have happened. I, a 6'1" man, started to just bawl my eyes out and beg them not to. I guess it worked because they left. Not quickly or anything, just, oh, okay, let's just go. Hadn't seen them or anyone else in that party since. So yeah, don't do drugs, kids. So these guys just came in and broke all your stuff? You need a better group or a better circle of people. Glad you're okay. I have asthma, and once when I was a kid, I used to run around a lot, to the limits I could just barely breathe air. One day I was playing with some of my friends tag, and I'm the slowest one as well, and I'm the most easiest one to be tagged, and I'm always the one who ran the most. But that changed very quickly, to the moment where I couldn't even breathe anymore. I couldn't breathe in or out for a couple of seconds, then I passed out without myself noticing. I woke up at home with my Inspire tube, a machine that helps people with asthma recover faster than a normal tube, on my lap. My mom was crying next to me, and when she saw me, I was awake, she came back to her senses. Basically, when I passed out, my mom told me my friends carried me home as fast as they could so that I wouldn't die. My face was purple, as I heard. After that, when I got to play with some of my friends anything, we would slow the action down so there wouldn't be any incidents ever again. Minneapolis during the protests or riots, depending on your viewpoint, was obviously how crazy things were about to get, and was out grabbing Chinese and picking up a copy of Borderlands. Driving home, and I hit a red light. A group of people with shirts over their faces appeared out of what seemed to be thin air and surrounded my SUV. A little guy, seemed to be a teenager, points a gun at my face and says, "You ready to die, bitch?" And other kids, "Do it, we gotta go." Long pause of what felt like a half hour, but obviously wasn't. Then I saw he wasn't even looking at me, but at the game on the dash. I slowly pick it up and try to pass it to him, but he isn't budging. Then says, "Who that for?" Caught off guard, I just stutter and say, "You, take it." He responds, "Who it for?" Told him for me. On the verge of a heart attack and crying fit, he pulls out his wallet and shows me he has an emblem of the game and walks away and ushers the other guys to run down a side street. My thoughts were racing in 1,000 directions, and I couldn't even remember how to drive, almost hit a street lamp. I still just say, what the F was I thinking about that night? Moved far away in the coming weeks, even left my job. And that was another example of video games possibly saving a life. One that immediately stands out to me is when I was 21. One night, I was at my aunt's house. We were watching TV. Her dog was a bit barky and would just start going off at anything. So he starts barking at a car passing by, and I spring up to pick him up and bring him over to the couch with me and calm him down. As I sat down, I couldn't catch my breath. It was weird. Typically, you would just expect a few seconds of catching your breath, but this went on for a good 5 minutes. It eventually fades, and I leave thereafter, get home, and go to bed. Don't think much about it. The next morning, I wake up to the same feeling. I wake up breathing heavily, unable to catch my breath. I start to get concerned, so I call the same aunt to take me to the hospital to get checked out. My mother was suggesting maybe I had developed asthma or something, and to not be too worried. I eventually get to the hospital again. It had stopped by this point. They do some tests, EKG, chest x-rays, etc., and don't really find anything, but decide to keep me overnight. That evening in the hospital, it started happening again. As soon as it did, my PCP just so happened to walk into the room to chat with me and see how I was. I think he just happened to be at the hospital for other reasons. By the point he walked in the room, I had already called the nurse station, They came over the intercom. He's confused as hell. I just sort of shout, "It's happening again." He's looking around wildly. They rush in with an EKG machine and sort of push him aside. I don't fully understand what's going on, but the results cause a panic. This is a small rural hospital, so they get me into an ambulance immediately to take me to a bigger hospital about 30 minutes away. I'm not certain the reason, as they haven't given me any real info at this point. I figure it's just more advanced tests that they need to do. The EMT in the ambulance happens to be a dude I went to high school with. He says to me something like, "Don't worry, this surgery is very minimally invasive." I just respond in shock. Surgery? Apparently my EKG showed a blockage, and they're doing a heart catheterization. In other words, I've had 3 heart attacks. This is the point where I'm certain I'm going to die. Well, obviously I didn't, because here I am. They had no blockage in the surgery. I hallucinated Santa Claus in the ceiling lights in the operating room under the twilight anesthesia. Good times. They tell me one, or more than one, of the arteries in my heart was just clamping shut and causing those readings. Coronary vasospasm. One of the nurses had only seen this happen in patients who use a lot of cocaine or copious amounts of diet pills, neither of which apply to me. To this day, I have no idea what caused it. I sort of suspect that it was because at the time, I was blacksmithing every day, and without proper ventilation. So I'd wake up, have a couple of beers for breakfast, start inhaling coal smoke while hammering hot steel. Makes sense to me that my body would do some effed up shit. I was on meds to prevent for a couple of years before just stopping them. Haven't had a problem since.